series lit your fuse as a young man and made you have to tell stories on screen?
Two things come to mind. One was a long time ago, and that was Network, and Paddy Chayefsky, who was, he's certainly in the argument for the greatest screenwriter ever. And in that picture, as he did in Hospital, he did it twice. He stone cold saw the future. What he predicted in those pictures became our society for a while. There's that great speech where, I'm trying to remember the actor who gives it, where it was just that the industrial complex, that business was going to take over everything. And it was almost like a holy speech from the Mount, but it was about this thing that was going to start. And he had a heroine in that movie who at the time seemed farcical to me. It was sort of preposterous. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, you were seeing her all over the place. Philadelphia Story was already an old movie when I was young, but it was great. It was the gold standard. And theater, I used to read plays then, and Kaufman and Hart meant a lot to me.
So on your way up, as you were forming your own sensibilities as an artist, what movie or series came along that was so good it made you think to yourself, wow, can I ever really rise to this level?
The Dick Van Dyke Show was the gold standard for comedy writers for 5 years. It was just, could you possibly get a chance to write for it, which I did not, and it was, and you would just daydream about it, it was, and there was no tricks to it at all. It was attractive people saying very funny things and liking each other. That was basically the log line.
So now, whether it was maybe a success of a work of yours or approval from someone whose opinion really mattered to you, what first gave you the confidence that you did belong doing this?
I found myself in a car with Mike Nichols. that was pretty great. I remember that night very specifically, but everything he said I remembered, and all of us remembered everything he said. I think there was. He gave me great advice through the years. Whenever I'd go into New York, it would be just things that you'd never forget. Like he had the theory that you tell it to anybody about to direct, and it's got to resonate. Who's your buddy on the film? In other words, everything's taken care of. You hired everybody. Who's your buddy? Who's the guy who watches your back? The woman who watches your back? Who you can talk to? Who can say anything to you? And he felt that very strongly. Buck Henry was his buddy. There's no way to resonate him because he was just so naturally funny and so smart and grappled with stuff. So that you had humility as well. When he got the award, the AFI award, everybody who got on that stage felt blessed that they got a chance to express their love for him out loud. That was the thing. I guess he and Nora Ephron were the two really beloved people.
I once did a reminiscence of Jerry Maguire and spoke in depth to Cameron Crowe, and he was talking about the influence you had on him, and and some of the things that you asked him to do and to write to sort of get a real handle on his characters. It sounded like in some ways maybe you drove him a little crazy, but you pulled things out of him that make that movie a bit of a classic. Where did you learn to do that?
First of all, I'm a television guy, and that means you come from camaraderie. You come from security. Movies aren't very secure, but a television series that's working gives you security. People can work together in a real close way. They can be friends, as we were and are, and it gets back to the buddy system too. I like to I hope I was Cameron's buddy on that picture. And I remember we had our hearts broken. We had Tom, then we didn't have Tom. So we had to really go through stuff to get the movie made. And there were problems. There were lots of problems coming one after the other, all of which were solved wonderfully. And then Cameron is a great journalist. Really, really great. He was doing major Rolling Stone pieces when he was 15 years old. And that journalism, when he got ready to put characters into a movie, and he'd come in with 2 or 3 lines, show me the money. He'd go out journalizing, and then come back with show me the money. Always you want some research. I broke in under Gene Reynolds doing my first series, and it was about a high school. And I went there more than the kids that year. He kept sending me back. I kept thinking I had enough, and he'd send me back. And that's one of the best things that ever happened to me, because that sort of stuck. And Mike, if we're talking about these things that light your fuse and everything, this what was it, last week's Succession episode? It just was that brilliant, and it was stirring, and people talked about nothing else. And I'm sure everybody, went around sort of feeling impoverished because it was so great, and inspired because it was so great. I remember seeing West Side Story when just early in its run, and then seeing Chorus Line where you just couldn't speak because the needle had moved, and that happened with this Succession episode.
So what would you say was the biggest obstacle that you had to overcome to allow you to turn projects that influenced you into your own language as a director and producer?
I always say that directing requires you to become legally insane, because you get so insulated. The movie's the only thing that counts. Properly so. It's your job, but you don't know what's happening in the outside world. Your interaction with your family is not as alive as it should be. You're preoccupied in this massive way, and it all feels life or death, and that's the tough thing. But there are many exceptions. This picture we just finished would be an exception to all that, because there were so many signposts that you could trust.
And I remember when we first spoke about it, this book meant so much to so many young women, my wife included when she was young, my daughters. Tell me, what kind of burned in you to help finally bring this seminal book to the screen, and what are you most proud of about it?
Basically, Kelly reached out to Judy Blume, who is a goddess. I mean, she's a national treasure, and said, she just said, I'd love to adapt the book, a 50-year-old book. And fortunately, Judy had seen The Edge of 17, which Kelly directed and I worked on, and liked it. And we went immediately. I mean, we just right. It was like we got the first encouragement. We ran for the airport, and we went to Key West, and that was. I mean, that's just so in my mind, because I was trying to be honest and say, look, when you do an adaptation, sometimes it turns out, just to be fair, I didn't want to misrepresent anything. And I was stammering all over the place. I was so awkward, and she's so great. And her husband, who's an amazing guy, was sitting off in the corner sort of with his back to us, and he hadn't said a word. And then we fell into an awkward silence, and he said his first words. He said, "We're doing this, aren't we?" And then we all screamed and hugged, and it was, and coming off that moment, it was always sort of like that. The thing that I keep on thinking of as we go into this weekend is that the spirit of this was so great, and I think Kelly can really accomplish that. There's a way that Kelly's on a set that's different from anybody I've ever seen.
50 years old, these coming of age, and the world has changed so much in some ways in the digital age and all that, but this coming of age milestones they're all pretty much they're all pretty much still relevant, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, and just doing the natural life of girls entering that time of their lives, just doing that, we are doing things in the film that never were seen before. Because for the strangest of reasons, I think.